Okay, so we're starting in with chapter 17. This is our final unit of the term. It's composed of two chapters. All right, this is being chapter 17, employment law, and we'll finish strong with intellectual property, which is always my personal favorite chapter. It's going to be unfortunate that we are doing it remotely, but we'll make the best of it. Employment law. All right. So let's start with the basic premise, the central premise of employment in the United States, and that is employment at will. All right. The vast majority of employees in the United States are employees at will. All right, and we're actually seeing this in our current environment, and that means that the employment relationship is actually very fragile. It can end for any reason, or honestly, no reason. And there are some protections here, but they're fairly limited. All right, but your default rule is that you can be fired for any reason, or and when you are fired, your employer doesn't have to give you a reason as to the reason you were fired. All right. Exceptions to that. All right. Contract theory. All right. So if I am, the main exception is the contract employee. So most of you at certain points in your careers, later in your career, will be a contract employee. All of the faculty, your professors at University of Cincinnati are contract employees. All of the administration are contract employees, which means the employment relationship is not at will. It's governed by a contract, a document that spells out what the employee will do and what the employer is responsible for doing. All right, so that's an actual contract. Think chapter 10. But this is contract theory, right? And what I just referred to was an express contract, but you can also have implied contracts. If the, for instance, if there is an employee handbook that states these are the causes for termination, and it lists, being late for work, poor work, and insubordination, right? Well, if that's what the employee handbook says, that's an implied contract that you could only be fired for those reasons, which is why if you look in an employee handbook, in bold print usually it says you're an employee at will and can be fired for any reason. All right, so most employers are aware of that and cover their bases there. Could also be implied for instance, if you're promised a raise if you work 50 hours a week for the next 6 months. Well, that's an implied contract that your job will be there for the next 6 months. All right. So that's contract theory. And implied contracts are based on, and they can be oral. They don't have to be in writing. Remember that from chapter 10. But they're based on actions of the employer. All right. Tort theory, wrongful discharge, which we talked about briefly in chapter 5. This could be for in violation of any federally protected class. All right, and those are race, color, religion, or national origin. All right. So if you are fired for one of those reasons, you can bring suit for wrongful discharge. It's an intentional tort. All right. Now, I will say that those aren't always the easiest cases to bring and win, because keep in mind, when you're terminated as an employee at will, your employer does not owe you an explanation. So if you believe you were fired for one of those federally protected reasons, again, race, skin color, religion, or national origin, you have to make that case with circumstantial evidence, right? Because there's not going to be a statement from the employer saying you were fired because you are Mexican or because of your skin color, right? And employees won't say that, all right? So those are difficult cases to make, but those protections do exist. Note that there is no protection for sexual orientation, all right? Or gender, all right? Public policy. So you can't be fired because you go to serve your summons, you receive a subpoena for jury duty, and you go and serve, right? If you're fired for that reason, that's a violation of the public policy exception. We see on the slides whistleblowing. So if your company is polluting and you make a report to the EPA, well, that's whistleblowing, and you can't be fired for that reason either, all right? So think of these as fairly limited exceptions. If you are fired from an at-will relationship, it's going to be difficult to find one of these exceptions to that fit. All right, and we want to think of employment at will as the central premise of American labor. All right, American jobs, the employee-employer relationship. All right, wrongful discharge I referenced previously on the previous slide, and we talked briefly about it in Chapter 5. It's an intentional tort, and if you are terminated for one of the exceptions that we talked about on the previous slide, you can bring a case for wrongful discharge. Now keep in mind, mitigation of damages is required. So even if you win the case, you have to show that you sought other opportunities to offset the lost income. If you can do that, even if you're not successful, even if you're not successful in getting another job, but you win your case, as long as you can demonstrate that you attempted to mitigate your damages, you can get back pay. All right? But if you don't attempt to mitigate your damages, you're going to have a much more difficult time getting back pay. All right.